"Get on the floor or she's dead." The words ripped through the air like a gunshot, freezing the glittering rooftop restaurant high above Manhattan. One moment, Billionaire CEO Evelyn Drake was raising a glass of vintage champagne to her. Foreign investors. The next, a cold barrel pressed against her temple. Screams erupted. A crystal flute shattered on marble. Power brokers and dignitaries, men and women who controlled billions, cowered under tables like children. The masked robbers moved fast, 3 shadows with guns cutting through luxury like knives through silk. But in the chaos, one man didn't dive for cover. One man didn't freeze. Marcus Carter, 26 years old, a black waiter working double shifts to pay off student loans, stood perfectly still, eyes locked on the trembling woman held hostage. He wasn't supposed to matter. To most of the room, Marcus was invisible, someone who poured their wine, refilled their glasses, and faded into the background of their billion-dollar conversations. But at that moment, as Evelyn's breath hitched and her life hung in the balance, it wasn't money or power that stepped forward. It was him. The leader sneered, noticing Marcus's stillness. "Stay back, boy. This ain't your fight." But Marcus didn't listen. His hands, steady from years of balancing trays through crowded aisles, gripped the polished silver he still held, and in a flash faster than fear could catch him, he swung. The tray smashed into the robber's wrist, sending the gun clattering. Across the floor, gasps filled the silence. Evelyn stumbled free, her eyes wide, disbelieving that a man she'd never truly seen had just risked his life for hers. The second robber cursed, raising his weapon. Marcus moved again, not with arrogance, but with instinct, the pure, selfless courage of someone who had nothing to gain and everything to lose. Investors peeked up from under white linen, watching in stunned silence as the waiter became something else entirely. Evelyn's pulse thundered in her ears. For years, she had believed control was her shield, money her fortress, and power her only weapon. But now, in the grip of real danger, she saw the truth. Her billions couldn't protect her. Her reputation couldn't save her. It was Marcus, the man she had passed by 100 times without a second thought, who stood between her and death. The room fell into a silence so heavy it felt like the city itself was holding its breath. Evelyn, shaking, looked at Marcus, not as a waiter, not as an employee, but as the man who had just saved her life. That night, beneath the glitter of Manhattan's skyline, a line was crossed. A billionaire and a waiter, bound by courage in the face of fear. And though no one in that room knew it yet, from that moment, their lives and their hearts would never be the same. Marcus Carter had spent his whole life in the shadows. Raised in a cramped 2-bedroom apartment in Brooklyn, he grew up under the steady hand of his grandmother, Ruth. She was a seamstress by day, a baker by night, and a woman who believed that dignity was the only wealth no one could steal. When bills piled high and eviction notices arrived like clockwork, she would place her weathered hands on his shoulders and whisper, "Courage is free, Marcus. Never sell it. Not for money, not for fear." It was a lesson he carried everywhere. Marcus had been a bright student, the kind of kid teachers whispered about in the teacher's lounge. If only he had the resources, he could be something extraordinary. He dreamed of becoming an engineer, building machines that could solve real problems in his community. But dreams were fragile things when crushed beneath the weight of survival. College came with loans so suffocating they felt like chains. By 26, Marcus was juggling 2 jobs just to stay afloat. At night, he worked security in a half-empty office building, watching shadows crawl across glass walls while his classmates from engineering school posted graduation photos he could never afford. By day, he donned the pressed white shirt of a waiter, slipping through crowds of the wealthy, balancing trays of champagne and caviar he could never taste. But what defined him wasn't the exhaustion, or the debt, or the invisibility. It was his stillness. Marcus was calm under pressure, intelligent, observant, the kind of man who noticed when a coworker was struggling to carry a heavy platter and wordlessly stepped in. He had a quiet kind of strength, the kind people rarely noticed until the moment it was needed. That's who he was the night Evelyn Drake's world collided with his. Evelyn Drake had built her empire on walls. Walls of glass, steel, and power. At 50, she was the CEO of Drake Tech, a global tech conglomerate worth billions. Her name was printed on Forbes covers, her words quoted in Wall Street journals. In boardrooms, she was legendary, polished, ruthless, and utterly untouchable. Evelyn had the ability to turn a man twice her size into silence with a single glance. Power was her armor, and she wore it well. She had grown up in privilege but never in peace. Her father, a steel magnate, drilled into her from an early age that weakness is a disease. By the time she was 30, she had taken over his crumbling empire and rebuilt it into something larger than he had ever dreamed. Loyalty, in Evelyn's world, was something bought, secured through salaries, contracts, and fear. Genuine care? She didn't believe in it. Single, childless, and endlessly guarded, Evelyn had mastered the art of being alone. People admired her. People feared her. But no one touched her heart. That was by design. So when masked men stormed her rooftop gala, and when cold steel pressed against her temple, her carefully constructed fortress crumbled. For the first time in decades, Evelyn Drake was vulnerable. And in that terrifying instant, the person who stepped forward wasn't her CFO, or her head of security, or the investors who claimed to respect her. It was the waiter, the man she had never once noticed. On paper, their worlds should have remained galaxies apart. Marcus was a man defined by survival, raised by a grandmother's wisdom, pushed forward by grit, sacrificing his dreams to pay bills. Evelyn was a woman defined by conquest, shaped by her father's cruelty, hardened by power, demanding obedience from everyone around her. Marcus believed in dignity. Evelyn believed in dominance. Marcus lived in silence. Evelyn lived in noise. Marcus carried a grandmother's voice in his heart. Evelyn carried a father's warnings in her head. Be every measure of class, wealth, and race they should have, remained strangers. He was the man pouring her wine. She was the woman signing billion-dollar deals. Parallel lines, destined never to meet. And yet, fate doesn't respect parallel lines. That night, when danger ripped through the glitter of Manhattan's skyline, those two lines crossed. Marcus Carter, the invisible waiter, risked everything without hesitation. Evelyn Drake, the untouchable billionaire, was forced to confront a truth she had never considered, that her billions, her fortress, her walls meant nothing when life hung by a thread. What mattered was courage, and courage belonged to the man she had overlooked. The next morning, as sunlight spilled through the glass walls of her penthouse office, Evelyn replayed the moment in her mind again and again. His steady hands, his calm eyes, the way he had shielded her, not out of duty, not for money, but because it was simply who he was. For the first time in her career, Evelyn Drake, the woman who had spent her life reducing people to numbers, couldn't stop thinking about a man who had nothing, yet gave her everything. And Marcus? He returned home to his grandmother's framed photo on the dresser, exhausted but alive, repeating her words to himself. Courage is free, Marcus. Never sell it. Neither of them knew it yet, but that one act of courage had already begun rewriting the story of their lives. Because sometimes the collision of two impossible worlds doesn't destroy. Sometimes it builds something no one could ever predict. The flashing red and blue lights painted the glass walls of the rooftop restaurant, scattering across broken champagne glasses and overturned chairs. The chaos had finally subsided. The robbers were handcuffed and dragged away, curses echoing into the Manhattan night. Guests whispered in tight clusters, still shaken but already spinning the story into something they could retell over cocktails. In the center of it all, Marcus Carter stood quietly with a torn sleeve and a cut on his forearm where the tray had shattered. He gave his statement to the police with a calm, almost apologetic tone, downplaying the courage that had saved dozens of lives. "I just reacted," he told the officer. "I don't want credit. Anyone would have done the same." But Evelyn Drake knew that wasn't true. She had seen the fear in the room, the way men worth billions dove under tables, the way her executives froze like statues. No one else had moved. Only him. When the officers finished, Evelyn approached, still trembling in her diamond heels. Her voice was low, almost unrecognizable even to herself. "You saved my life." Marcus shifted uncomfortably, wiping his hands on his apron. "Ma'am, I did what anyone should have done." "No," she said firmly, pulling a sleek black card from her clutch. "Take this. My assistant will arrange a transfer. $50,000. Consider it a reward." He didn't even glance at the card. "With respect, ma'am, I can't take your money." Her brows arched in disbelief. "You can't?" "I didn't do it for a reward," Marcus replied softly. "I did it because it was right." For the first time in her career, Evelyn Drake was speechless. People begged her for money. They fought for her attention, angled for her influence. Yet this man, who worked double shifts just to pay for a cramped apartment, refused what others would have killed for. Something cracked inside her fortress of certainty. The next morning, whispers swirled in places Evelyn could not ignore. At the investor breakfast, a European board member leaned across the table and said bluntly, "You do realize, Evelyn, that your life was saved not by security, not by staff you pay 6 figures, but by a waiter." The words hit harder than she expected. She forced a smile, brushing it aside as coincidence. But when Li Wei, the Singaporean billionaire whose opinion carried weight, spoke, the room fell silent. "True leadership," he said carefully, "is knowing who you would trust when the room falls apart. Last night, you found yours. Remember that." Evelyn nodded, pretending to move on, but her mind replayed Marcus's voice over and over. "I didn't do it for a reward. I did it because it was right." Curiosity, a dangerous seed, began to grow. Evelyn had always trained herself to forget faces of service staff. Waiters, drivers, cleaners, they came and went like wallpaper. Yet she found herself asking about him. "What's his name?" She pressed the hotel manager. "Marcus Carter, ma'am. He's one of our part-timers. Reliable. Works nights too, I believe. At a diner in Brooklyn." A dinner. Brooklyn. 2 words that should have belonged to another universe, far from hers of boardrooms and penthouses. And yet, days later, Evelyn found herself stepping into that very diner, dressed down in a simple black coat and sunglasses, as though her presence could be disguised. Marcus was behind the counter, balancing plates and pouring coffee with the same calm focus he had shown under gunfire. He didn't notice her at first. When he finally did, his eyes flickered with recognition but not awe, not the fawning gratitude she was used to. "Ms. Drake," he said politely, wiping his hands. "Didn't expect to see you here." The diner smelled of frying bacon and burnt coffee. So ordinary, so far from her world of silk tablecloths and vintage wine. She slid into a booth. "I wanted to thank you. Properly." "You already tried," Marcus replied, half smiling. "Didn't work." The corner of her mouth twitched. No one spoke to her like that. It was refreshing. "Why refuse money you clearly need?" she asked. He leaned against the counter, thoughtful. "Because money fixes bills, ma'am. It doesn't fix people." What happened that night wasn't about bills. It was about being human. His words landed heavier than she expected. Evelyn, who had lived her life buying loyalty and silencing opposition with cash, suddenly felt exposed. Later that evening, alone in her penthouse, Evelyn found herself staring at the skyline. Investors had praised her bravery at hosting the gala, but she knew the truth. She had been paralyzed. He had acted. For the first time in decades, Evelyn Drake felt curiosity, not about a competitor, not about a deal, but about a man who refused to be bought. Marcus, meanwhile, tried to shake off the strange encounter. To him, Evelyn Drake was untouchable, a billionaire whose life had collided with his for a fleeting moment. He returned to his routines, double shifts, and late-night study sessions, reminding himself that his life was built on survival, not miracles. But fate has a way of ignoring boundaries. Days later, as Evelyn left a shareholder meeting, one of her oldest investors approached her with a pointed smile. "Funny thing," he said. Everyone in that room knew you were saved by a man you didn't even know. Don't waste that lesson." She froze, because beneath the polished advice was a simple truth. Marcus Carter had become more than a fleeting moment. He was now a mirror she couldn't ignore, and so curiosity turned into something Evelyn never thought possible: respect. She began to replay their conversations in her mind. His refusal, his dignity, his courage. In her world, everything could be bought. But in his, value was measured in something far rarer: principle. And though she would never admit it aloud, Evelyn Drake, the billionaire untouchable in boardrooms, realized she had met the one person whose worth she couldn't calculate. What she didn't know was that Marcus, too, was unsettled, because no matter how much he wanted to fade back into invisibility, something about her eyes in that diner booth haunted him, the eyes of a woman who had never needed anyone, suddenly searching for something she couldn't name. And deep down, both of them knew the robbery had not been the climax of their story. It had only been the beginning. The boardroom had never felt so suffocating. Floor-to-ceiling windows stretched across Manhattan's skyline, but for Evelyn Drake, the view was nothing but glass and pressure. Around the long mahogany table, her investors whispered in clipped tones, their voices sharper than the crystal tumblers resting in front of them. "Rumors spread fast, Evelyn," one of them said, adjusting his cufflinks. "Word is, you froze. That night." Another leaned forward. "You let a waiter protect you while your own team collapsed. How does that inspire confidence in leadership?" The words pierced deeper than she expected. She had built her empire on fearlessness, on icy control. But in the quiet moments, alone in her penthouse, she had replayed that night over and over. The cold steel pressed against her temple, her own paralysis, and Marcus's steady courage. She remembered the way he had stood between her and danger, as if he had been born for that moment. And no matter how much she wanted to bury it, the truth screamed louder than the gossip. She had frozen, and he had acted. 2 weeks later, Evelyn stood under the glittering chandeliers of another gala, reporters circling like hawks. The cameras weren't just focused on her fashion or her company's new expansion. They were waiting for her to falter, to explain the whispers. "Ms. Drake," one reporter shouted above the noise. "Can you comment on the robbery at the Skyline Gala? Some say you froze. What really happened?" The room stilled. Her advisors stiffened, expecting her to pivot, to bury the story with corporate polish. But Evelyn didn't. She looked straight into the cameras, her voice steady and clear. "The only reason I am standing here today is because of one man's courage," she said. "His name is Marcus Carter. He is a waiter. And when everyone else panicked, including me, he stood up. He protected me. He protected us all." Gasps rippled through the room. Flashes exploded as reporters scrambled for the name. Marcus Carter. A waiter. Evelyn Drake had just credited her survival to someone who wasn't even in her world. It should have ended there. A soundbite, a headline. But fate had other plans. At a charity event days later, Evelyn arrived in a flowing silver gown, her every step followed by whispers. She had invited Marcus, quietly, against her advisors' protests. "It's reckless," they warned. "People will mock you. You'll be accused of romanticizing the help." And they were right. When Evelyn introduced Marcus to a small circle of executives, the mocking began almost instantly. "Evelyn," one rival CEO sneered, swirling his wine. "Surely you don't expect us to believe this? Young man is your new bodyguard? Or perhaps your new project," another added with a smirk. Laughter trickled around them, low and cutting. Marcus stiffened, his jaw tightening, but he said nothing. He wasn't surprised. He had seen this look before, in classrooms, in job interviews, in every room where people measured worth by skin color and bank accounts. He had promised himself long ago that their prejudice would never dictate his dignity. But before he could excuse himself, Evelyn did something no one expected. She reached for his hand. In front of cameras, investors, and rivals, she laced her fingers with his and held them high enough for the room to see. Her voice rang out like steel wrapped in silk. "This man," she declared, "is braver than any billionaire in this room." The air cracked open. Guests froze. wine glasses suspended midair. 1,000 whispers rose at once, reporters scrambling, flashes blinding. Marcus looked at her in stunned silence, the warmth of her hand burning against his skin. Evelyn Drake. Untouchable. Untamed, the woman who had built her fortune on power was openly risking her reputation for him. Afterward, they slipped away from the chaos onto the rooftop terrace, the city humming below. The night air was cool, heavy with the scent of rain. Marcus leaned on the railing, still processing what had just happened. "You didn't have to do that," he said quietly. "Now they'll tear you apart." Evelyn turned toward him, her silver gown glinting in the moonlight, her eyes softer than he had ever seen them. "I've built my empire on fear," she admitted. "I've spent my whole life thinking respect could be bought, that loyalty came with contracts and zeros. But you," her voice trembled, just enough to betray the crack in her armor. "You saved me with something I didn't even know I was missing. Respect. Dignity. A choice made with no price tag." Marcus met her gaze, his own steady but cautious. "I didn't save you because you're Evelyn Drake, the billionaire CEO. I saved you because it was right." She exhaled, her grip tightening on the railing. "And that's exactly why I can't ignore what that means." Silence stretched between them, thick and charged. The city lights below blurred like constellations. For the first time in her life, Evelyn Drake wasn't the woman commanding a room. She was simply a woman whose heart was betraying her logic. Marcus finally broke the silence. "Evelyn, your world and mine." "Don't say it," she cut him off gently. "Don't tell me it's impossible. I've started billion-dollar mergers. I can stare down this." Her hand brushed against his again, not in a show for cameras this time, but something fragile, private, real. For a moment, the world of power, suits and profit margins melted away, leaving only two people, one who had saved a life and one who had finally found hers. And though neither of them said the word, both knew the truth. Love had just crossed the line. The world didn't wait long to respond. By the next morning, Evelyn Drake's name dominated every headline, but not for her empire or her billion-dollar deals. Billionaire CEO credits waiter for saving her life. The story spread like wildfire. Some tabloids mocked her. Ice Queen romanticizes the help, but the public saw something else entirely. Clips of Evelyn's declaration at the charity event circulated online, her hand clasped tightly in Marcus's as she called him braver than any billionaire in the room. Within hours, hashtags were trending. E.g. respect over wealth. Gihag, courage, can't be bought. Millions of comments poured in. Finally, someone in power who recognizes true dignity. Others simply said, "Marcus Carter is the kind of man we need as a leader." For the first time in her career, Evelyn wasn't being celebrated for ruthless negotiations or cold efficiency. She was being admired for honesty, for vulnerability. And that admiration only grew when Marcus himself was interviewed outside the diner where he still worked. "I didn't do anything extraordinary," he told the reporter calmly. "I just did what was right. That's all courage is, choosing the right thing when it's hardest to do." Behind the cameras, Evelyn was working quietly, pulling strings no one expected her to pull. She had discovered the crushing weight of Marcus's student debt, years of loans that had chained him to survival jobs instead of his dream of becoming an engineer. She called her financial advisor. "Clear it," she ordered, but when Marcus learned of it, he shook his head firmly. "No." Evelyn frowned, confused. "No? Marcus, this isn't charity. That's exactly what it feels like," he interrupted gently. "And I don't need pity, Evelyn. I've walked too far with dignity to trade it now, not even for freedom from debt." Her chest tightened. For a woman who had always used money as leverage, the rejection hit harder than any boardroom betrayal. But then Marcus added, his voice low and unwavering, "Unless you call it something else. Not charity. An investment. In me. In what I can build." Evelyn's lips parted, her gaze softening. "A partnership," she whispered. He nodded. "Then I'll accept." And just like that, what could have been another act of billionaire indulgence transformed into something far greater, mutual respect. The seed of something lasting. The recognition rippled closer to home, too. When Marcus returned to his grandmother's small brick house one evening, he found her waiting on the porch, her cane resting against the rail. She smiled, her eyes glistening. "The world finally caught up to what I've always known." Marcus knelt at her feet, resting his hand over hers. "What's that, Grandma?" "That you're a man of worth, not because you saved a billionaire, not because cameras saw it, but because when the moment came, you didn't hesitate. You did what was right." He swallowed hard, her words settling deep in his chest like anchors of truth. "She saw it too," his grandmother continued softly. "That woman, Evelyn, she saw the man I raised you to be." Marcus couldn't deny it anymore. Evelyn's face, her trembling voice on that rooftop, the way she looked at him not as staff, not as someone beneath her, but as an equal. Those moments replayed in his mind every night. For Evelyn, the shift was even more profound. The woman, who once thrived in solitude, who had been untouchable, feared and admired for her coldness, now found herself turning to Marcus not out of necessity, but out of desire. Late-night calls replaced icy silences. Quiet dinners in her penthouse replaced endless banquets with strangers. She began seeking his counsel, not on business deals, but on life. "What do you think respect really means?" she asked him one evening, her glass of wine forgotten on the counter. He didn't answer right away. He simply looked at her, then finally said, "Respect means seeing someone as human before anything else, before money, before status, before mistakes. Just human." Her throat tightened. "And you think I can do that?" "You already did," he replied softly. For the first time in her empire-built life, Evelyn Drake allowed herself to exhale, not as a CEO, not as a billionaire, but as a woman learning how to let her heart be led by something stronger than pride. And Marcus Carter, once invisible in her world, became the center of it. Months turned into years, but the memory of that night on the rooftop never faded. What began with fear and chaos had unraveled into something far greater, a legacy built on love, dignity, and the quiet power of respect. Marcus Carter, once just a name on a shift schedule, finally finished his engineering degree. With Evelyn's encouragement and her partnership, not her pity, he co-founded a tech initiative designed to give underprivileged youth access to tools, mentorship, and opportunities he himself never had. Every child deserves the right to dream bigger than survival, Marcus said at the program's launch, his voice steady but his eyes glistening with the pride of a man fulfilling a promise to his grandmother. Within a year, hundreds of students were learning coding, robotics, and design thinking, their potential no longer trapped by circumstance. Evelyn Drake, meanwhile, underwent a transformation few had ever expected. Once feared for her ruthless efficiency, she began reshaping her company into something more humane. Policies shifted: fairer wages, inclusive leadership, mentorship programs. When asked why, she answered simply, "Power means nothing without dignity, and dignity belongs to everyone." The world noticed. Investors who once whispered doubts now praised her for vision. Employees who once feared her now followed her with loyalty born of respect, not obligation. The story of that night, the billionaire saved by her waiter, went viral again when Marcus and Evelyn appeared side by side at a technology summit. Headlines blazed: "Waiter saves CEO, becomes her partner in life and business." The hashtag "Respect is Power" trended worldwide, becoming more than a slogan, it became a movement. Schools adopted it in character education programs, corporations quoted it in training sessions, and activists used it to remind the world that respect, not privilege, is the true foundation of leadership. Karmic justice followed in quiet waves. Rival executives who once mocked Evelyn for romanticizing the help were exposed in scandals of fraud and corruption. While their empires crumbled, Evelyn's company thrived, fortified not only by innovation but by integrity. In the boardrooms, where power was currency, respect had become her greatest asset, and Marcus her compass. Through it all, their relationship grew not on spectacle, but on substance. They were seen walking together not just at galas but at community events, Marcus just as comfortable mentoring kids in a worn-down gym as he was standing beside Evelyn at international conferences. Their love was never about wealth or status. It was about two lives colliding in a moment of danger and discovering that true partnership, romantic and otherwise, is built on mutual dignity. Evelyn once told him, during a quiet evening when the city lights stretched endlessly below their penthouse windows, "You saved me from more than a gun that night, Marcus. You saved me from myself." And Marcus, with the humility that had always defined him, simply replied, "You gave me the chance to prove what I always knew, that respect is the strongest kind of power." Together, they didn't just rewrite their own story, they gave the world a new one. A billionaire was saved not by her fortune, not by the walls of privilege she had built around her life, but by the courage of a man the world had overlooked. Marcus Carter wasn't supposed to matter to the powerful in that room. He was supposed to serve quietly, fade into the background, and remain invisible. But in the moment when fear silenced everyone else, his dignity became the loudest voice. From that night forward, Evelyn Drake and Marcus intertwined their lives, not in the language of contracts or deals, but in the language of trust, respect, and love. Their story became living proof that greatness is not measured in numbers on a balance sheet or the skyline of a city, but in the courage to stand up, the humility to honor others, and the dignity to see value where the world refuses to look. True strength is respect. True wealth is love. True legacy is dignity, and that is what lasts beyond titles, money, or fear. If this story touched your heart, subscribe to our channel for more stories of Black excellence, social justice, and the dignity that transforms lives.